What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Boomio Too Long Didn't Watch podcast. This is number 16, and I'm Chris Puckett, your host. I'm joined by Duncan Thorin Shields, a.k.a. the esports historian. And we got a scuba master on the show today, Mr. James Bardolph. How you doing, James?
I'm good. I'm trying to recover sleep. I almost didn't sleep at the major for some reason, so getting there slowly but surely. Apart from that, I'm great.
Now, we're going to be talking about everything the major, but before we get to that, we got to jump in with some of the quick hits. Let's start here with the iBUYPOWER story. Duncan, a lot of rumors on Reddit of who these players are going to be teaming with. Basically, the guys that got banned a while ago are now allowed back into competitive Counter-Strike. Are they still banned from the major? Can you break it down for us? What does it mean for players like Dazed?
Yeah, this story is actually a bit weird because the way it's reported, I feel like people went too extreme one way or the other. Basically, when the team threw a game in a CEVO match in, I think it was like September, August maybe of 2014, months later, basically going into the beginning of 2015, we had an official response from Valve after it had been investigated and exposed by Richard that they definitely threw the game. And the response was they were banned for match fixing, the entire team except Skadoodle, due to some complications where he hadn't accepted the skins, basically. And at the same time, what a lot of people don't always remember is that they also banned shortly afterwards a French team who was like the third best French team at the time, which was the Epsilon lineup, except Scream, because he also wasn't involved in the throw in theory, but in his case, not at all. So what happened was, initially, Valve put out a statement where they said something, it was quite vague wording, which was along the lines of like, essentially no one should associate with these people. And so even though in theory it was only Valve banning them, that meant that a lot of other tournaments basically mirrored the bans. So, for example, ESL said that means you're also banned from our tournaments because people, I think the fear in the industry was that even though technically you don't have to ban them, maybe Valve then wouldn't consider you to host a major, for example. So even though I doubt Valve had said that to these companies, a lot of them just sort of went along with it just because they thought, well, why would I do match fixes a favor anyway? Just ban them, follow the Valve ban. But an interesting detail a lot of people forget is that sometime last year, Richard actually spoke to Valve because at the time he was petitioning them to, would you at least give us a date of when these players could get unbanned by Valve? And even though they essentially said no, we have no plans to ever review these bans, what they did say was something along the lines of other tournaments could, if they wanted, unban them. Like they implied that, it's only our tournaments that have to stay at that status. Now, the reason this is a key detail is no one did unban them. Like nobody came out and announced that they would do it. Because again, I think the logic of a lot of the tournament organizers was always, well, if there's one, it's like okay, what people always say about certain political topics. It's like, even if everyone agrees something should be changed, if it's kind of like an image issue, no one's going to be the guy who stands in favor of that particular issue, because it's not going to get you elected. So I feel like it's the same thing. A lot of tournament organizers could have unbanned these guys a year ago, but I don't think the climate was right. Whereas if you look, because Valve's probably never going to unban them, there was a lot of hype coming into this major because ESL had said they would consider it at least. A lot of the hype was obviously on the side of unbanning them. Like I think at this point in time, the people who really want them to stay banned are a very, very vocal minority. And so ESL announced that they've unbanned them, but here's the key detail. At the moment, it's only ESL. So that's still pretty good that you've got Pro League, potentially IEM. That's a decent circuit of tournaments. But for example, ECS, James over here, they haven't unbanned them yet. DreamHack hasn't unbanned them. PGL hasn't unbanned. I mean, I don't even know if PGL had them banned technically, but you know what I mean? No one else technically at the moment has unbanned them. So at the moment, if they choose to compete, they can compete in ESL tournaments only.
And ESL was kind of the first group to start getting those players involved again. We saw Daze coming in kind of in a guest position, providing some analyst commentary. Then they kind of hired him full time, correct?
I mean, they hired him for like Pro League season, I believe. And then after that, he did I think he did IEM Oakland and maybe did EPL finals. And then he also did actually do ECS, by the way. But aside from that, he hasn't done that many tournaments.
James, do you remember all of the players that were a part of the iBUYPOWER ban? And of those players, who do you think has the best potential to come back and get back into active duty as a player?
I actually forgot entirely about AZK, but then I remembered that I had some conversation with Dazed, and he really highly rated AZK's skill. So I would say that from what we've seen on Reddit so far, it seems that Dazed, Swag, and AZK will try and do something together. And I know Dazed and Still don't get on as well as some other teammates might do. So I think that trio, because they're essentially, I'm assuming that's correct. They're essentially a unit. Obviously, it's going to benefit them the most because they're only the least players, right? Because if you look at it from existing teams, it's like, do you want to compete in a major or not is essentially the question. Whereas Steel is kind of like just Lone Ranger at the moment, as far as I can tell. So it's going to be a lot harder for him to do much from what I can see at the moment.
To land a spot. It's got to be a tough position, and I just want to hear from you guys. Is this a position where you could live off of one tournament provider? Could you make a living, be it a professional Counter-Strike player, knowing that you're limited to only ESL events as of now?
I think if you have a full team, I think there are enough organizations in North America to give a reasonable salary. I would say that there's more opportunity in North America than there are players of a reasonable level, for example. So in that sense, maybe, but I think Daze, for example, has got a good streaming game on, so he's got a diversified income. AZK, I'm assuming, would have to give up Overwatch, and Swag, I don't know what he's been doing in the meantime. So, I think they'll get a livable salary for sure. Yeah.
Duncan, out of that group, do you see any of these players getting on a powerful squad or a team that could compete for series prize money?
Yeah, because I think they'll just make a team themselves. Like, I actually think that's the reason why this is a more interesting story than the fact that they were unbanned. Because if they were unbanned, but they were all just out there and, they each had to find a team to join, I would say they're basically done, because you can only join a team, obviously, that has no goals whatsoever to playing in any minors and then going up through the ladder, going to qualify, going to the major one day. And as we've seen, even teams like Renegades famously have complained many times when the minor has overlapped with like EPL finals, for example. Most people will prioritize the minor and the major circuit over even tournaments that are bigger. So as a result, I think you'd have to find like a team basically that was not going to big lands. So it almost wouldn't be worth it, implicitly for your own time. So for me, what makes the story interesting is, as you've said, if those three band together, you have already got three players who there is no reason couldn't be top NA players, but all can't compete in the minor system, and therefore it would benefit each other to play with each other. And so with that core alone, you could already send that to a DreamHack Atlanta type tournament that we just had, and they'd have a good chance of placing like top 4. Then you've got to add in the juiciest detail to me was that apparently Foxior, who was one of the Epsilon players who was banned, who was like clearly the best player in the team aside from Scream, because he was kind of like a rising talent in 2014. Apparently he already had reached out to Dazed and said, like, maybe I can play in this team. So if you have 4 of those players, you're already at a stage where you've got 4 players who are much better than the level of any team who aren't good enough to kind of play in the minor system. So I think there's already orgs would be interested. And then because your level's good, you also actually, if you could get to the EPL finals, which is doable, could be half decent. And then finally, kind of to tie into the thing about the streaming thing, I think the unusual situation for these players is people like Dazed, and if you wanted to, Swag, etc., they have ways of generating like brand awareness beyond the level of the kind of play you'd normally be signing if you were signing a lower level team. So I feel like there is an obvious niche they could carve out. It's just that they kind of almost have to go that route. I think they have to play together, because otherwise, like, let's say, for example, Dazed is a great in-game leader. Let's say he picked up a bunch of unknown players. The problem is if any of them get at all decent, you wouldn't really blame them if they just moved on to another team. So I feel like it has to be that core of players to make even the premise work.
Back then, out of the group, who was the best player at the time of their banning?
Probably Swag. I think he was a pretty good player, yeah. Like he was someone where he was already established on LAN, he'd already been top 8 in majors with the Cloud9 and Call guys. So I think he's a pretty good shout for it.
Now, I saw an interesting comment on Reddit. It wasn't a thread. It was just a comment in a much larger thread. And apologies to the user because I didn't write it down. But they had an idea that you could potentially see this new group of this team that forms out of the formerly banned players breaking into the ESL Pro League spot because the spot belongs to the orgs, not necessarily the players. Is that true to your understanding? Could a team like Ghost Gaming potentially remove their current roster in favor of these bigger names?
I mean, James, you run a league that I believe also the spots belong to the organization, correct? As in Dignitas didn't have Well, I had one player, and then they got the same spot as the old lineup, right?
Yeah, if the spots belong to the orgs, then they can do that. As far as ESL goes, I mean, I guess so. I'm not 100% up on their rules, but they will make things work if they think it favors them as well. So.
As far as I remember, their like wording when they actually put out a statement on that, because it happened last season with, I think it was like Winter Fox initially, where they kicked out the NA team and they signed that like Australian org. At the time, the wording that ESL said was that, like, in theory, you can just add a totally new team, but they claimed it had to be like around a vaguely similar level. Like, it couldn't be, it can't just be like all your friends or whatever. It has to be an actual pro team. So I think it'd be more like, would people qualify those players as being good enough? And I think the issue is, since a lot of them still play like Rank S and ESEA at like a high level, I think you'd have a hard time arguing that like a bottom of invite level team was significantly better than them, even though they haven't played in quite a while. So I don't think it would be an issue in that sense.
Okay.
And also, there's so much fan support on your side. I think people would just be hypocrites even if they didn't think that and go, no, it's fine. Just let them play.
Always the community vote as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to go with that as well.
Let's stay on the same topic of ESL Pro League squads, because one other team that we should highlight here is Rogue, and that is the new home of Hiko. Hiko is playing alongside Wrath, Vice, and Shinobi, according to the Liquipedia page. Is this a squad to look out for? How much do you know about this team, James?
Well, they've only got 4 players. I did nominate myself for a 5th, but Hiko said no. Is it a squad to look out for? No, until they prove otherwise. Obviously, they need to have an entire roster first. But I mean, when any North American team is announced and it's 5 people, I think for the most part you can just assume that not much is going to get done until they prove that they are going to get something done. So I would go on the side of caution on that one. Hopefully he finds something, but I don't have much expectations. It's up to him to prove us that they can make something of that team.
Could he bring in a duo of Dazed and AZK or whatever combination of players come out of this unbanned situation?
I would be surprised if he couldn't. Even if they had just signed contracts, I'd be surprised if he couldn't be like, look, let's add these guys and just kick these guys. I'd be surprised if they couldn't make that happen, because it would probably be in their interest. Obviously, Dazed would be a strong addition as a leader. And yeah, I think it's like for Hiko, it's a case of where can I go with this team and where can I go with those dudes? So, I mean, in the short term, that can work. I don't see any, he had trials with Optic, didn't work out. So he had longer term opportunities, which didn't happen. So maybe it's viable for him to do that.
Because there's other squads as well that don't have full lineups right now. According to the page, we have Splice, who has just 3 players, Roka, Semphis, and Drone. You have Ghost Gaming, who's Wardell, Neptune, and Connor93 as well. So I'm wondering, are we going to see these North American players that just got unbanned landing on one of those squads? Another team to talk about here that's making roster moves is Misfits. And formerly, they had Relics on the bench after bringing in the 2 French players. Now they have officially released Relics. After watching him over the last 16 months, Duncan, is this a guy that you think is going to land on another one of these teams in the empty voids on Ghost, on Splice, on Rogue? Or what do you see happening to a player like Relics?
I'm almost certain he will be an invite player. Like, I would assume he'll get onto one of these teams, especially because NA is very famous for recycling all their talent, essentially. Because, I mean, to be fair, it is just like everyone speaks English, so you can go to any team. It's not the same as in Europe where you have the nationality dividing things. But the problem for someone like Relics is that in the teams he was on where he got to play in tournaments like E-League and go to some of the bigger lands in the past, he had like some games where he was okay, but he wasn't really like a breakout star. Like, he wasn't someone who really put himself out there as like, you've got to get this guy, which is kind of what people already were saying about people in the past, like Twist, like Sick. You could kind of see there was something there. So I feel like his problem is he's kind of in the no man's land of being good enough to get on an invite team, certainly, but I don't think he'll be actively pursued by any of the top teams. I mean, the fact that Misfits themselves didn't use him and instead chose to get in these somewhat unknown French players is not really that great a statement to his character as it is,
Understood.
On the
Oh, good.
On the subject of Ghost, I just wanted to add that Wardell is definitely one to look out for. He is a really nutty AWPer, but he's young, so he doesn't have as much experience, and the decision making may need more experience and guidance. But like if I was Dazed, for example, and I've got 2 players, I would definitely be trying to pick him up because I think it'd be a great addition. And with the team he's on at the moment, I mean, they got absolutely fisted in ECS League last season, and they had a revolving door of people playing as well. So I think that he is definitely someone to get sniped, no pun intended.
And I was doing a quick Google search to see how much the Ghost Gaming house is. I know they bought up a giant mansion out in Hollywood. This place, multi-million-dollar location where they're paying a crazy amount. I know our Call of Duty team is over there. They have like a Gears of War player. You might have a team house right away if you do sign up with Ghost Gaming. So definitely a squad to keep your eye on as this moves on. Let's go from the teams in North America that are looking at playing in the ESL Pro League and now talk about some of the squads that were involved in the major. North comes out, according to HLTV, it looks like they will be benching Magisk in favor of AZ. What are your thoughts on this? Because just 12 months ago, Magisk was one of the biggest names, James.
Magisk in favor of AZ?
I believe that's what I read. Did I get that totally wrong? Fill me in.
Wait a minute. What does that mean, though? Because AZ's in the lineup as well.
I think it was
Valde,
rumored. The Valde. Or another guy. There were 2 names mentioned.
I believe was the other one.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the latter. I don't know if that's gonna solve the problems on North. To be honest, I mean, AZ is a strong player. He was pretty good on FaZe. So, I mean, if they're bringing, I have no idea, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know if it's going to fix their problems. It's just wait and see. As far as I'm concerned, maybe Duncan has a stronger opinion on that.
And Duncan, I did find the article, so excuse me, guys. It looks like Magisk is going to be benched, and it's still unseen whether it's going to be Valde who comes in or whether they'll play with a person like Mertz, who is on their academy roster. Mertz with a 1.24 rating this year. What do you see happening over there for the Danish squad?
I think both are certainly possibilities. Like, here's the thing. Funnily enough, I just put out a video tonight, which was literally about when Dignitas had their little peak in the autumn of last year. And part of that was because Magisk was a guy where he was considered just an onliner and like an okay LAN player at best. And he had this incredible run from the summer up until about November, when he legitimately had numbers that were like, we're talking like a top 5 player in the world. He really was very, very good at the time. And the problem is, ever since then, Dignitas and then now North, they've been up and down in their results. You know, sometimes they have a good placing, but in general, they've underwhelmed. Like, they've never really come close to really winning a tournament since then. Like, I didn't ever think they were going to win that EPL final they were in. And the part of the problem has been that it's been Magisk who's been the player who's suffered the most noticeably. Like, yes, AZ's numbers haven't been good, and I don't think he's fit his role that well in the team, but he's been consistently at that lower level. Whereas the thing is, Magisk was, like I said, at a very, very high level before, was looking like the best player in the team. And he's just settled back to becoming a very average player in their team. And Config's been the star player. Cajun's still a pretty good player, but you don't expect him to be the superstar. MSL's just the in-game leader. And so the obvious person who hasn't been living up to kind of the billing has been Magisk. And the problem is, because he only did it for about, let's say, like 4 months last year, and he's so young in his career, he's only really been at the pro level about like a year and a half, 2 years. It's not as though you can just say, oh, it's like a great player from the past, you know, like a get right. Maybe they'll pick it up again in 3 months and become really good. So I think for North, I would have to assume they've given him his spots, they've played around him. If he's still not responding in terms of performance, at worst, you've got to kind of bench him and try something else, which is maybe where Mertz comes in. Because if he's already on your academy team, you've already kind of got him signed right now. And if you remember the timing, sooner or later, you have to kind of divest yourself of those academy teams anyway. So maybe get on and do that now while you've still got the contract. I think the Valde move would be a very interesting one, because Valde would be a player who I think would fit into Magisk's spots pretty well. I mean, he already stood in for them at ECS at the end of last year. But more importantly, because they are both kind of fairly passive style of players, you know, and they're both pretty good sprayers. So I feel like it wouldn't be a terrible fit. I think North has to make a roster move of some kind anyway. They've just had this one lineup for, I mean, a solid 7 months or so now, and I don't think it's been that great.
You said that Valde filled in once before. What happened when he filled in? Who was he replacing, and how well did they place?
Yeah, he actually replaced Magisk. It was at ECS Season 2 finals. Unfortunately, though, he did just come in like with no scrims, and they had been traveling tons. Like they'd played some inordinate amount of lands over the months before, and that was the one where they beat SK in the opener, but then they lost to SK, who had Fox as a stand-in in the deciding best of 3. So they did pretty decently at the tournament. He didn't do that great in terms of numbers, but again, I mean, he essentially was inserted into someone else's system with no practice. So I don't know what you can really expect in that scenario.
Yeah, Counter-Strike takes a little bit of practice. Those are the quick hits, the big ones for today. Any of the smaller stories outside of the major that you guys want to hit before we dive into it? Perfect answer. That's what I like to hear. Jumping into it, James, you've been to 5 majors. How does Krakow rate overall? What did you think of the event in general?
It was one of my favorites. I mean, it had some technical issues, but I think one of the saving graces is that PGL have enough of a proven track record to know that that's not the norm for them to have all those issues. So it's really unfortunate for them. But people say you're only as good as your last performance, right? Whatever that performance may be. And for me, the live event with the crowd would be separate from all the days before. And the live event was amazing. It felt to me like when you watch a World Cup football game or soccer for you, and you see the local nation's crowd or whatever team is playing, they have their people the hardcore who've come, and it's like a festival. We had that in Poland. There was you really needed to like egg the crowd on. They were just loving life and being awesome for the most part, even when Virtus.Pro weren't playing in most of the matches, and even when someone won a round, if they respected the way the round was won, they'd still give it applause. So
awesome.
It felt like a festival. The nearest thing that I've seen to that in the majors I've been to would be in North America, but this was, I mean, that stood out on its own as well. But this was something even more than that. It was really like a World Cup feel, which was amazing for an esports event for me.
How does it compare to an event like Katowice?
I haven't been there. So the only event I've done at CSL is Cologne. To compare it to that, obviously, Cologne is like a massive tumor of a crowd, which is really cool, and they're noisy as well. But honestly, Krakow was bonkers because it was just festival feeling every time there was a match on in the crowd. It was unreal. I haven't seen anything like that in esports, so I couldn't really compare it to anything in esports because for me it stands out on its own.
It sounds pretty amazing. I saw the videos afterwards and 15,000 people in there cheering on the games. It seems pretty insane. Duncan, we touched a little bit about the early rounds on last week's show, but let's recap for anyone who missed episode 15. Who were the big favorites coming in to this major, and what was the biggest storyline in your mind coming up into this $1 million event?
Well, the funny thing about this event was it was one of the rare majors where it seemed almost certain that the winner would be SK, Astralis, or FaZe. It seemed incredibly likely, those 3. I mean, I think when I did a video, I said something like, if you add those 3 and then put in G2, who were kind of like the big wild card, I said there's got to be like a 95% chance one of those 4 teams win. And obviously none of those 4 teams end up winning. And in fact, 2 of them went out in the group stage, the Swiss system. So I think that's got to be the most overarching story. Not only did one not win, half of them didn't even make the playoffs.
James, on your end, did you think it was going to be those same 3 teams that would be in the semifinals and eventually the grand finals?
Yeah, I think it's hard to pick a team to make the finals outside of those teams. You never know Virtus.Pro, but I think it's hard to pick them at least at this stage. So, I thought some teams had the potential for some deep runs, but those 4 were definitely favorites. So it's a hard argument to go against them.
So we touched on it last show. James, you were there in person to witness it, though. What happened to FaZe Clan? How did they unravel and bomb out 3-0 in the group stage?
Yeah, I was really surprised that they lost the flip side because, flip side for me in majors, they're always there, but I feel like they're a gatekeeper team. It's like they're not going to do great. They might not even do good, but they're going to sometimes you'll be that team where they'll stop you doing something, and they beat FaZe 16-10 on Mirage, which was really really surprising to me. Waylander went bananas on that, so that's not a good that's not a good match for FaZe. They shouldn't be losing to Flipside, I don't think. I think there's quite the canyon between the level of the two teams on any given day. So that's not good for them. They went close with Mousesports as well, but I mean, maybe I don't know where Mousesports lie in the grand scheme of things just yet. So obviously, it's still an upset for FaZe to lose to them, but it's hard to say how close it is with Mousesports. I mean, they didn't do as well as they could have. They lost a lot of close rounds in a row, so who knows how far they would have gone. So I don't know how much we could measure against the loss to Mousesports from that, but losing to Big as well. I mean, they got blown up by Big on Inferno, but I mean, Big seemed to be very strong on Inferno throughout the tournament. So I think that's that might be a nasty surprise, and a lot of teams find it hard to adapt and stop Big on Inferno. I mean, losing all your matches is going to be a problem, isn't it? I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think if it was best of 3, then you could argue that more of the top teams. I mean, in longer sets, the team or player with the more skills should prevail, right? So best of 1 can be tricky, especially when you're up against a team you don't play every day, like Big, where you have a very short space of time to adapt to what they're doing. And if they break your buy round and your economy's screwed, then it's going to be very difficult to get around that in a best of 1. So things can turn into an avalanche pretty quickly. So maybe if it was best of 3, then they would have a much better chance of a better performance and then have a better read on their opponent. But you beat who's in front of you, and they didn't manage to do that at all.
Yeah, Duncan was a little bit surprised by the caliber of teams that eventually knocked out FaZe. But if you're a FaZe fan at home, how worried do you need to be about your squad? You just finished top 4 at ESL Cologne, but then you come in and you fail to make it to the playoffs of the major.
I wouldn't be worried if I was a FaZe fan. Sometimes you're going to shit the bed, for lack of a better phrase. And most of their recent results are far better than this. So you need to see what happens in like the next 2 or 3 months. See if this is an inexplicable anomaly, or if this is a trait of something greater, which might be a problem. Time will tell.
Next question for you, Duncan. Let's talk about where we left off on the last show. It was G2 beating Cloud9 in an overtime game. Now they're coming in. It's match number 4 in round 4, of course. And G2, see here, they ended up going up against Astralis here. Now, talking about how all of the teams matched up, was this a series where Astralis was definitely the favorite before the game ever began, or did you think G2 matched up pretty well?
I thought they actually matched up decently well, because if you look at the maps that G2 is strong on, they're strong on a bunch that aren't really Astralis maps, like Nuke and Cache, which Astralis will play because they banned Cobblestone. But I actually thought that it meant that they would end up somewhere reasonable. So they did end up on Inferno, which is pretty much a shared map between the two. Like, neither team's godlike on it, but they're both pretty good on it, and they don't mind playing it. So to me, this just kind of shows how much G2 misfired at this tournament, because in a bunch of the games they had, which admittedly, they had a tough run of opponents, but there were a bunch of games here where if they'd played anywhere close to their peak form, they would have been really in with a shout to make it. And this was an example of a game where they just got blown out completely. Like, they were never in this match. And I think in general, the line that you put through G2's performance at this tournament was kind of underwhelming.
And James, right after the loss to Astralis, which some people could say was semi-expected, G2 has to match up against Fnatic. When you saw that matchup on paper, what were your thoughts coming in? Who did you think had the edge in the round 5 to decide who moves on to the playoffs?
I would favor G2 in that matchup. Fnatic, obviously, they haven't reached the Fnatic Evolved, and who knows if they'll ever get back there, but I would feel that G2 are, which is something I mentioned in some of the Fnatic matches against their opponents, is that I feel like G2 are slightly more of a team than Fnatic. But Fnatic always have that individual flair where they can just win rounds and matches on their own. So for me, G2 would be a slight favorite going into that, but you never know with Fnatic, especially when it's elimination time. They've got the experience for it. Both teams have, in fairness, but yeah, I would have favored G2, but there we go.
And Duncan, did you get a chance to watch that G2 Fnatic? What went wrong for G2, or what went well for Fnatic to lock up a top 8 spot?
Yeah, this was actually one of the best maps of the tournament. I thought it was a very, very back and forwards game. And basically what happened was G2 had a very poor CT side, which when they were back at EPL, on this map particularly, they were having really strong CT sides actually, and they looked very good. So that alone was a terrible sign. And they did the patented G2 force buys all the way through. So I remember in the first half, the score wasn't completely out of control. And then there's a point at which they just force bought pretty much every round. And part of the issue is sometimes the couple of rounds they did win were from the CZs. So I can see to some degree in their brains as to why they thought force buying more and more made sense. But the reason it didn't is because at the end of the half, where you managed to only win 4 rounds, they really did only get about half of the gun rounds in that you could have had if you'd have actually saved at some point. So they were already backs against the wall. But I'm sure they still thought to themselves, right, we're a T-side team, we have all these really strong players, it should be possible. But what Fnatic did really, really well in the second half of this game, this is a quality that Fnatic has if they're in a tournament like a major that a lot of teams at their level don't have, which is because their players are so experienced and they have such good individual players, they just played exactly what you want to do if you're Fnatic. And they did loads and loads of like weird pushes and like getting like, for example, a classic move I saw, which I've been trying to use myself every time I play now, is if on overpass, JW pushed up through the connector to underneath the ladder that the terrorists come down, but he would just hold that position. And one time he heard someone run by, Shocks run by. I think I might even have been the pistol round. So he had information advantage on G2. Yep. Another round, he just stayed there so he could creep out later and kill Kenny S in the back. Kenny S is thinking, well, there's no one can be there. You know, they've had to come from behind me at the spawn. And so that's just like a perfect example to me of what Fnatic is always able to do at majors, even if they're not the best team, which is like they will have the ballsy play where it's the other way around. Normally, if you're the team at a major who's in the lead, you're going to be like, oh, let's just play it very safe. You know, let's not take any risks here. You know, everyone's a bit nervous on both teams, so let's just play out the game standard style. But if you're Fnatic and you've had so much success, you can be the guy who puts more pressure on the opponent by taking the risky move or doing the one thing he's not expecting, and that will make them turtle up even more. So I think G2 was underwhelming in the game, but Fnatic really kind of like, they did their part of like applying the pressure all the time to make G2 break.
Was there a star player from Fnatic in this tournament for you, James?
Well, I mean, to add to what Duncan said, like there were some rounds where everybody pushed at the same time on the CT side for Fnatic. So it's, I don't know, it's hard to say, but like one thing that's weird is when you commentate so many matches, sometimes it's hard to remember even what you saw 5 minutes ago.
Oh, I know that.
So it's hard for me to pick one from Fnatic, but I think the nature of the team and the flavor they can bring in all being able to do something crazy, like Duncan said, like I think they work as a unit, and they might argue with each other sometimes, which is partly why they broke up in the first place. But it's kind of that weird formula that kind of comes together, might be a bit turbulent on the inside, but so in short, I think, I mean, there isn't one for me, partly because I have a terrible memory, but also because I think that they're all capable of doing something like that, and they'll all have their moments. So it's hard for me to pick one person.
Understood. Let's talk a little bit about the G2 play style. And Duncan, on previous shows, we talked with Kerrigan about the double op strategy. The map's overpass. Is that even an option for you? Because it sounds like they didn't have money to begin with, but is it because they weren't getting the equipment that they are used to playing with?
I mean, this is a map where I think you definitely can double up. It just depends which players you have in your team. And luckily for them, they do play one in each of the sites. So I think it's absolutely a viable move. The bigger issue for me on this one was just that, like, they were already, but it's an example of, this is exactly the thinking that all these French teams have had that do the force buys, and that force buy to oblivion is what they'll always say is, yeah, but the reason why I kept force buying is because I was on the round that could have broken the opponent's economy. And it's like the part of the sentence they never then say is like, but if I lost the round, my economy is entirely destroyed and I can't ever come back from it. So what I'd love to do is, instead of arguing with these guys like I've done for like 3 years, I'd love to just sit them down with like Glaive and, Fallen, and just say, why don't you just force buy every single round? And then Listen to what he's saying. Do you hear the words? That's all. At this point, that's all I can do. Stage an intervention. I can't keep telling them 700 tournaments. Because here's the thing. I understand the concept of why it is good to force buy at times. Like, for example, if there is a one key round where you totally will break the opponent's economy, and for example, let's say it's on a map where you can get some pushed up position or something. The problem is they just do it every time, and they've just resigned themselves to the idea that if it never works, then we will just lose the game, which I don't think is really like a very good meta game approach to playing CS.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a few of the other matches that were going on in round 4. The next one I want to highlight here is North versus Virtus.Pro. Both of these teams were coming in with a 2-1 record here, and I wanted to get your thoughts, James. How strong was Virtus.Pro after seeing them struggle in Cologne? Were you surprised by what they were bringing to the table in Krakow?
I'm never surprised by Virtus.Pro because of how up and down they were. Like, if you look at the season before last of ECS, they ended up in relegation. But then if you look at the qualifying match they had versus Space Soldiers, best of 3, it's like one of the most insane matches I've seen in a very long time. It was absolutely insane performance from both people. So you just never know which Virtus.Pro is gonna turn up, and that's on a day by day basis. So like, you go to the semis and they got absolutely dominated. Like, I feel like if they play the same, like if you ran that scenario 3 times, maybe they win twice. So okay. It's really hard. It's really hard with Virtus.Pro. I don't know if there's any known science behind what makes them play outstanding one day and then have a horrible performance the next day. It's a mystery. I mean, it's something that's caused them to pretty much have everybody be in-game leader. So I could never be surprised by performance from Virtus.Pro. You have to, like, for me as a commentator, you have to go in with no expectations, and obviously you can refer to the recent, you have narrative, right? But beyond that, you just never know what they're going to turn up with. You know what they're capable of, but you never know when it's going to come out.
Absolutely. That makes being a VP fan one of the exciting parts, but I'm sure also an agonizing part. Duncan, on the flip side of this, we saw North coming in. They lost their very first game of the tournament. That was against Cloud9. They rattle off 2 wins. Now they're set up against VP. Were they the clear favorites for you entering that match?
I think I'm trying to remember, but I think I picked VP to win that one. I believe. It's hard to remember. I know it was a very close one, though, because both teams haven't been in great form recently. Admittedly, they both have decent map pools, so they're going to end up with something shared. So, I mean, it's expected to me that it would be a close game. And obviously, late in the tournament, people can be eliminated at this, not literally from losing that game, but at that point in the tournament, you have to worry.
And the last match in round 5 that a lot of people on my timeline were talking about was Virtus.Pro. Of course, they lose to North there. It was in round 30. They have to play Cloud9 for a spot in the playoff bracket. Who was the favorite coming in? Because Cloud9, they just finished second place at ESL Cologne. But Duncan, you were saying they didn't necessarily impress you that much in terms of who they had to play. They weren't truly challenged. Did you think this was Cloud9's match to win?
I certainly thought they had a chance. Like, I do feel like they're the better team out of the two at the moment. The problem in this particular one is there's a really, really long precedent of Virtus.Pro particularly doing very well against NA teams. I don't know if it's something like stylistic matchup or something. I also feel like part of it is that most of the NA teams have like younger players and players that aren't as experienced at the top level. And so I feel like there is kind of that aura around the Virtus.Pro players when the NA players play them, that like, oh, they always beat us somehow, and these guys are legends, and that sort of a mentality. So I think it puts the other team just like at a lesser footing coming into the match. So I think that evened up the odds a lot. And then obviously Virtus.Pro is just a much better team in the game.
Big beat Cloud9, and then we saw G2 beat Cloud9. James, go ahead. What was the Green Room's thoughts on this matchup in particular?
I was just going to say, with regards to Cloud9 on Train, they actually, I noticed that they had done some work on there. For example, I'm actually going to put out a video of what Automatic was doing. Like, when you have the usual wall of smokes that comes in onto the A site, let's say if you're on an eco but you're trying to get extra money with a bomb plant, when those 3 smokes would go down, Automatic would be Nick Connector, and he would put a smoke through their smokes, kind of halfway between where the smoke is and Pop Dog. So he's got a gap to work with, and he would go through and kill people trying to plant the bomb and things like that. So Cloud9 showed a lot of interesting things, and they had done some study on the map, which was really cool to see. But obviously, they're going to be really disappointed not going further in a tournament. I think that's fair to say. In terms of the green room, like people are scattered around a bit, so it's hard to. I don't even know where I was during their matches, but sort of narrowly lost to G2 on Cobblestone, which is I don't know if it's worse when it's close or if it's like a complete spanking when you think you should have done better. But I mean, Stu and Automatic had good games in the tournament. Like Stu had it did go to overtime, but he had a 30 bomb, which wasn't enough in that, unfortunately. But I mean, I focused mostly on Cloud9 when they were playing Train because I saw some interesting things which piqued my interest there. So it seems that they, one criticism of North American teams is that they don't always put the work in, but it seemed that they definitely put some effort into their matches. So I know they'll be disappointed with not going to the playoffs.
And who's calling the shots currently for Cloud9? Who would be the person that is helping them innovate the new strategies?
Well, shot caller in the game, I think, is Automatic at the moment. They have Valen standing behind them. I haven't spoken to him too much. So in terms of who's doing the work outside of the game, I'm not quite sure who that would be, but I think Automatic's calling inside the game.
I thought they switched back to Stu 2K, but we'll see. I think that was like 2 tournaments ago. I think for CS, I think they said they switched back to Stu 2K.
Okay.
Duncan, was there one player on Cloud9 that shined brighter than the others for you? Was there a star from this squad, even though they fell short in groups to VP?
I mean, the stats say it was Automatic. Like, he actually had very strong stats at the tournament. Stewie 2K didn't have like great stats, but then again, I don't blame him as much because his role, like if you're an entry fragger, you will die a lot in the game. So I would say his role, he did okay. He certainly wasn't a star level performance, but I don't really blame him that much. Beyond that, though, the rest of the team was kind of a mess.
As we take a look at the teams that did not qualify for the playoffs, Cloud9, Flipside, G2, Na'Vi, Mousesports, Penta, FaZe, and Vega. FaZe Clan, I think, has to be at the top of the list as the biggest shocker. Who would you guys put as number 2? Who are you most surprised not to see finish in the Final 8?
G2.
G2? You agree, James?
Well, surprised, yeah, I'd say G2, but I'd say most unfortunate for me was Mousesports. For me, I think they came really close in some of their matches. There was one game on Train where they lost, like, there was a very narrow situation in maybe 6 rounds in a row, and they lost every single one of them. Like post plants, clutches, it was just a complete, like a psychological disaster for them. So I think they were really unlucky not to go further. And there was some good potential, I think, in the existing roster. I think they could do more than they have, but I think there might be some top-down pressure. So because they didn't make the playoffs, I don't know if there'll be roster changes. It might be on the cards for them. But I think they were really unlucky. I was excited to see what they could do, and I think they could have gone further on a different day. But then the same could be said for many of those teams who will be playing in the qualifier next time. So,
if there is a roster change, who do you think is going to be involved?
I think it would probably be Dennis. Funnily enough, I think the major was one of his better performances. But you're not changing Robs. You're not changing Oscar. I don't think you're changing Chris J either. And out of Lowell and Dennis, I think Dennis is probably going to be the one on the chopping block, if anybody.
Let's talk a little bit about Na'Vi. ESL Cologne, not a terrible tournament for them. Were there any expectations from either of you to see them finish top 8?
I had them coming top 8. Yeah, I thought so. The thing with Na'Vi is, like, it's not just that they finished top 4 at Cologne, but there's just so much talent in the team that I think they're never a team that you can just go ahead and say, right, they're definitely not going to get out the group stage, or they can't get out the Swiss system. I mean, they've gotten out of quite a lot this year. They've gotten to the playoffs a surprising number of times. And part of that, I feel like, is because because they're not actually one of the best teams, but they have so much talent, the fact that in the Swiss systems and group stages that are best of ones, you're always meeting in the middle of the map pool is good for them, actually. It means they never get exploited onto maps like Nuke that they're not that good on. They can normally play on like a Mirage, Inferno, something that they like to play on and get a chance. So I think you give a team like that 5 potential chances and they are going to win 2 or 3 and therefore be borderline to make the playoffs.
If people didn't get enough Counter-Strike, and we want to highlight one game from group stages alone here, fellas. James, I want to start with you. Was there a favorite game for you out of the 5 rounds, any of the teams involved, just one that kind of resonates in your mind before you got to the major stadium?
I think the Fnatic G2 and Overpass was cool for the same reasons Duncan mentioned earlier, like when JW was getting sound cues essentially and allowing to rotate like that. I think from a spectator's point of view, it's really nice to be able to engage that kind of thing and see a team moving in motion, and you can see the communication behind their movement. So that's pretty cool. I think I had a personal interest watching Mousesports, so I don't recall which train it was, and maybe it was against Cloud9. It's probably a good one to watch to see what Automatic was doing around the A bomb site, but also, how close Mousesports were. Paul Robs was always left like in a 1 versus 4 playing, on the B bomb site and so on, which sucked for him. But if I had to pick one, I'd say the G2 Fnatic one is definitely not a bad one to pick.
And why are you such a Mouse fanboy? Let's talk about this.
Well, for the longest time, we've had to commentate Mousesports, and it's been difficult with their older rosters. But now I feel like they have a roster which actually has potential, which is exciting. Like, I'm excited to watch Mousesports. I'm curious to see what they want to do. Oscar's working well in the team. Obviously, Rops is a great extra addition, not only because he came for FPL, that's like a small thing, but the main thing is the nature of his journey, no matter where it was, and how young he is, and how much game sense he seems to have, which is something that you normally accrue over a period of time. I'm told he is or was a Call of Duty player. I don't know too much about his history, but and how many pros are excited when they watch him, be it ex-pros, pros. So there's a lot of things which I think are very interesting in the Mousesports team at the moment. So people like to nerd out and watch them and see how well they'll do.
Is this guy going to have a bright future? If you could call it right now, how confident would you be in saying he's going to be top 4 in a major by the end of 2018, 2019?
That partly depends on contracts and how long his contract is. Team players are signing longer contracts, maybe from lack of experience, signing longer contracts these days. But that aside, I think he's so young and he makes so many smart decisions already that his future must be very bright. He's already playing on an international team, which only adds to his resume. So, as long as he doesn't get homesick, then the sky might be the limit for him.
Duncan, before we get to your favorite game, what are your thoughts on Mousesports? Are you as high on them as James is?
I thought I think I actually picked them as one of my teams to make the playoffs. I think they're a good team, and actually, I think this tournament was a bit of a crusher for me because, yeah, they were very borderline to make it, despite the fact they only won 1 game, because they were in so many close matches this time, and also they had some tough opponents. I think they're a good team, but they're a team where it is obvious, like, 2 qualities. 1, they don't have amazing leadership. Like, Chris J is just the in-game leader because someone has to be, and I don't think he's done a fantastic job of it. I think a lot of it has been kind of getting carried a bit by Oscar. And then secondly, they're such an inexperienced squad, and they come from such divergent, like, backgrounds that they're not really that cohesive as a team. I think they have good players, and I think like they have a few maps that they're pretty good on, but it's kind of hard to see how they're going to break through to any kind of a next level at the moment. That's why a lot of people are looking at Rops and just hoping maybe if he develops individually a bit more, that can be something that changes the results.
Let's talk about your favorite match now, Thorin, from group stages. Did you have one in particular that was the best for you?
I mean, I picked the other one technically, but I'll provide a second one. I'll do all the heavy lifting.
Thank you.
Right, so
Thank you, sir.
I'll say
we appreciate
to watch the Big versus SK game, because at this point in the tournament, halfway into that game, everything looked like it was like business as usual. Like SK is going to 3-0 the Swiss system. They won the first half heavily on the CT side. Cold Zero was having insane numbers as he had all the matches so far. So at the time, it's like, okay, well, it's SK on T side. They're easily going to grind out, 6 rounds or whatever it was. And actually, absolutely failed to. And this is a really big performance from Big. And so for me, this was the best game that Big actually played at the tournament, because SK is very good right now. Inferno's a map that they've been getting wins off tons of people on, especially some of the best teams in the world, like FaZe, like Astralis. So I feel like this was the one where I know Big didn't ultimately do much because in the playoffs they were a little bit underwhelming, but this was probably the best moment for them in the tournament, and it was kind of a shocker that the favorite for the whole thing loses in that fashion.
Big wins on Inferno. I remember that was kind of the highlight of our last podcast, Duncan. All right, final thoughts here on group stages. I want to close it out with your thoughts on the format for future groups. We've had so many Swiss systems used in back-to-back major events. James, starting with you, are you tired of the Swiss system? Do you think it's doing us justice in the Counter-Strike world? What would you like to see be the official format moving forward for the next major?
The Swiss system is good for upsets, but that's not the priority when you're looking at competitive integrity. So a best of 3 series is always going to be superior. That may require more days to be added to a major, which then I don't know if it was Duncan or Lurpis who wrote something recently about, I think it was Duncan actually, about Valve and how they organize majors, which is kind of, it just kind of appears, and it's almost like just kind of forces its way into the calendar at some point, so and causes lots of problems essentially. So if there's better preparation from Valve in that respect and more forewarning in general, then there's no reason why. I mean, because the group stage is studio anyway, doesn't really change too much to add a day or two and have a best of 3 system. So it would be superior, and it will help the cream rise to the top rather than have upsets, which maybe each individual one means too much in the current system. So the players have expressed their dislike. Only that, though, they haven't really suggested anything, but I think it could only be better to have like a best of 3 system over Swiss groups.
Duncan, if we want best of 3s, but we don't change the budget, would you be willing to have less teams involved to have best of 3s throughout all the group stages? Take it from 16 to, say, 12 or even 10 teams?
I don't think so, especially because like there are, in the past, when the majors first began, 16 teams was more than enough. In fact, the last couple of spots would always be like iffy European teams that were never going to do anything at the tournament. I think now there's way too many good teams in tier 2 that already, I mean, you saw the major qualifier, like Team Liquid didn't get through. There's a bunch of teams that are good that didn't even make the major. So I don't think you can reduce the spots. Although the key thing is, I don't think that you'll ever be forced to make that choice, because I already, like, for example, I mean, I think the best suggestion of all, because remember, when you're dealing with Valve, and first of all, we have no direct communication, so we never know what they're thinking. And then secondly, you usually have to try and come up with a fix that you're going to sell them on the idea that they don't have to change much as it is right now. Like, I could already tell you a bunch of formats that wouldn't require much difficulty. But if you want to change it and make it best of 3s, you could literally take the current GSL system we have and just change it so that one of the best of 3s is the winner's match, basically.
Just switching around when those best of 3s happen. I understand that point. Let's move on. Duncan, we've covered the Swiss system tons of times on previous episodes. So if you guys want more of Duncan's thoughts on that, make sure to check them out. YouTube.com/Boomio. But moving forward, the playoffs. Playoff bracket comes out. First off, break it down for us, Duncan. How did the teams get seeded, and what caused all of the outrage on Twitter?
Right, so what makes it bizarre with the Swiss system is with the GSL system, obviously every group is won by a team and every group has a second place group. And so it's very easy. You're just going to have a winner of a group play a second place team. So that's randomly done in majors, but the key element is you already know what's vaguely possible. In Swiss system, it's very bizarre because 2 teams go 3-0, but then 2 teams go 3-2. And then let me think, how does it go? 2 teams go 3-0, 3 teams go 3-1, and 3 teams go 3-2. Now, obviously, the 2 teams that are 3-0, so Big and Gambit, are going to get the 3-2 teams. But there's going to be 1 3-2 team left over, and 2 teams that went 3-1. So essentially, 2 of the 3-1 teams have to play each other. So the 3-1 teams were SK Gaming, Astralis, and I think North maybe.
Yep.
And so
North
there was
and VP, right?
Of those matchups, there was literally only a 1 in 3 chance that it's SK plays Astralis. But unfortunately, that is indeed what happened, and that is, as a result, how we got this matchup in the quarterfinals.
So looking at the quarterfinals, James, you guys finally see the playoff bracket. It's single elimination, and you see Gambit, Fnatic, SK Astralis, and then in the bottom half, Big Immortals, North Virtus.Pro. Obviously, SK Astralis is the toughest draw possibly here, but how did you think the 2 sides balanced out? Was one side more difficult than the other?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think the side without Astralis and SK would be easier. But that said, it was interesting because I thought that any of the 4 teams in the bottom half, Big Immortals, North, or Virtus.Pro, I felt like any of them could end up in the finals. And one best of 3, like a team like Big, if they've got gimmicks they're not ready for, then they may even win the whole thing if they can make it there. So I thought that there was a very good chance we would get a peculiar result or an unexpected final at the very least. But I would have expected Astralis, SK, or Fnatic to a lesser extent to make it there. I'm a fan of Gambit as well, but you'd expect one of those 3 to be in the final at least, but none of them were. So it turned out bizarre. But at this point, when the draw was made, I mean, Astralis versus SK is like not the first match anybody wants to see.
No.
But I focused more on the bottom half because I thought that, looking at the bottom half, I really thought any of those teams could have made it to the final.
And Duncan, of the 2 teams that went 3-0, Gambit and Big, who had the tougher first round? Was it Gambit matching up against Fnatic or Big matching up against Immortals in your mind?
I think it's far and away the Gambit matchup because, first of all, Gambit had literally lost to Fnatic in a best of 3 at DreamHack Summer, so they already came in with kind of like, we lost to these guys as it was. Secondly, it's Fnatic in majors, and as I said, one of the key qualities they have is, you can beat them, certainly, they're not the best team anymore, but they do kind of have like a bit of championship poise, and they will kind of put you in tough situations that only the champion type teams can do. And then you look at Big's draw, I think Immortals, it was touch and go that they even made it out. I have to say, the Immortals getting the draw of Flipside as their 5th match, that is almost proof positive that you cannot keep having tournaments with no reseeding, because that is one of the most bullshit draws I've ever seen, because the other matches was VPC9 and Fnatic G2. So in no universe should Immortals be allowed to play Flipside there. So I already thought that Immortals probably shouldn't have been in the playoffs as it was. So I think that was not that. Actually, I think Big should have won that matchup if they were as good as people thought they were.
James, were you surprised to see Immortals come out over Big here?
Well, I mean, we've watched Immortals play in our league, right? So they have had some struggles. KNG is a good addition to their team. He might be the best player on the team, but they've had some weird things in the past where they've put themselves in difficult situations. Like, double up is obviously strong for them, right? But when you double up on the T side, it can take strategy away and just force you to play for picks. And if you don't get those picks and there's 30 seconds left, you're reduced to a really awkward situation where you're going to just have to try and rush a site essentially and just get annihilated and just lose everything you have and maybe give inventory to the other team. So we've witnessed them do that kind of thing. And yeah, they did get a very good draw to make it to this point in the first place. But Big, I think for me, Big is the team who were surprising. I know the potential of Immortals in their output, which can be absolutely devastating. But Big, they had some good matches, but I think with that team, they've had less top flight Counter-Strike. Well, that might be a hard argument because I've seen a lot of Immortals play in North America, but not necessarily in a global tournament. So that might not count so much. But for me and what I've seen in CS, Big were, for me, it was a 50-50 because you don't know if Immortals are going to make fatal mistakes, which I've seen them make in the past. And Big, it's still early for them in the sense that I don't know just how much potential they have. So for me, Big Immortals was a coin toss. But again, it goes back to me thinking that any of the teams from the bottom 4 could have made it to the finals potentially. Maybe less so North because they had a draw with Virtus.Pro, but there we go.
Now, Duncan, did you get a chance to watch the full Big and Immortals match?
I watched a bit of this one. I wasn't paying like maximum attention to every game, but I saw some of it.
And when you saw them, I mean, the first map, Cobblestone, that one's overtime 19-17 in favor of Big. Then we finally see Big dropping Inferno, and it's 2 Immortals 16-7. Sets up a train, and that goes to around 30. When you saw train being selected and knowing that you're the map wizard here, who do you think has the edge if this is another rematch? Who do you say wins tomorrow?
See, Train is an example of a map where I give Big credit for clearly being a team that have done good scouting and being very prepared. Because when they won it against LDLC in the opening game at the EU Minor, actually, it was kind of like a bait pick. Like they set it up where LDLC is pretty good on that map and no one really knows that like what Big do because they hadn't been playing it very much. But they obviously had something prepped for them and it worked and they won that game. Now, obviously, LDLC is not a very good team. The big problem I have is it's all well and good to have prepared and have an idea of how to play a map, but that doesn't really matter when you play against better teams. So even though Immortals is not like a truly world-class team, they have gotten pretty good on Train over the last few months. It's been one of the maps that they certainly are willing to play, which is funny because like a year and a bit more ago, it used to be a map that they used to be terrible on. They used to be very, very like lackluster on the T side of, but they've improved a lot in that respect. So I was actually quite concerned for Big going into that third game. In fact, I actually thought this was a series where Big could have lost every single map they played in it. Like Cobblestone is a fantastic Immortals map, as they showed in the finals. So I feel like actually the map veto was a bit confusing to me from the guys from Big. I'm surprised with the way they went for it overall. I mean, obviously they trusted that Inferno again was a map that they're prepped on. They won the group stage, but that's the one they got smashed on.
Bit surprising there. Let's talk about the match below it, North and Virtus.Pro. This is one that had a lot of people excited. VP takes it 2-0, and the game 16-9 on Cobble, 16-10 on Nuke. Was this match close if you were actually watching it? Was it a situation where North just didn't execute certain rounds, James, or was this VP kind of steamrolling through into the semifinals?
For me, this match is a haze because obviously the crowd was going absolutely bananas. So it was you're kind of half looking at the match and half looking at the complete spectacle of madness that was in the crowd. Awesome. So to be honest, I can't answer your question because we were sitting in there in the suite and you're just kind of looking around at everybody jumping, just the clapping, just all kinds of madness. Every time Virtus.Pro went around, I go completely bananas. So maybe Duncan has a better idea.
Well, let's skip that question completely and talk purely about the crowd. What was your favorite part? Was there a group of fans or any stories that you have from just the people that were in attendance, James?
It was funny when we were commentating the semi-final. It was quite challenging because we were kind of between Virtus.Pro matches. So it was very, very. I knew it was going to be a difficult game because maybe 20% of the crowd would be invested in it compared to the other ones. But funny enough, the loudest the crowd was during that match is when Snacks walked out. He just came for a walk, and then everybody started going bananas. And Dan was commentating at the time, so he wasn't sure what was going on because his back was to. But I looked behind. I was like, sure, this something must be going on in the arena. And lo and behold, Snacks is walking around, and then everyone's got their energy back. So that just gives a clue. Honestly, it was when Virtus.Pro first played. It was because they got smashed in the second game, but in the first one, it was insane. Like I can't really describe how nutty it was. It was amazing.
I remember just the VP crowd at MLG Columbus when they did the Columbus Major. You heard the giant Virtus.Pro cheer. I can't imagine what it was like over in Poland. Duncan, talking about the match in particular, Cobblestone and Nuke. Are these clear wins for Virtus.Pro coming in? Is this where North unraveled? What happened in this series?
You could make a very strong case that these are the two best maps of Virtus.Pro. So you have to start in the veto, and MSL I think he's mentally ill at this point in time. Like, I think he's actually just got something wrong in his brain because he just repeatedly allows opponents to take their best maps and then thinks that he's going to win series against them. So, I mean, that sets you off on a bad foot initially. With that said, they are two good maps for North as well. But I feel like if you're North, Virtus.Pro right now is very vulnerable. Like, you could have gone with like surprise picks. I mean, you beat them on Mirage in the actual Swiss system anyway, so why not go with that as a map pick, for example? But they didn't do that. So that in itself's bad. And then if you watch the games themselves, the best player for North, far and away for the last 3 months, has been Config. And he had an incredibly bad series. All his numbers were down. Like the kills were down, the damage especially was really down. And so your best player doesn't turn up at all. You win 6 T rounds over both maps combined, and you've picked into your opponent's strengths when they have the entire home crowd behind them. So I feel like they got what they deserved in this game.
Let's take it to the top half of the bracket. We thought Big Immortals was going to be close. Immortals, they go to the semis. Virtus.Pro, good on both of their maps. They get past North. Gambit Fnatic, though, you said this was a tougher match than anything we saw in the bottom half of the bracket. Why was this one a fun match to watch, James? Well,
Dozier almost 30 bombing is always going to be a good game because that doesn't happen very often. I'm a fan of this team. I think Zeus changed things wildly when he joined compared to before. I'm a big fan of Adren. I mean, they've got a lot going on, but it seems to be coming together really well. I mean, the last few months haven't necessarily been spectacular for them, but I thought they had a lot of potential to have a deep run. I didn't expect them to win from the outset. I think you'd be crazy to when they're in a bracket with SK and Astralis. But I think I said at the time that I think the strength they had versus Fnatic, which is something I mentioned earlier, is that Gambit were more of an organized unit, whereas Fnatic at the moment will sometimes have to depend on the individual plays and the aggression and the overextension. But when that gets capitalized on, then that's going to be a problem for them if the team are strong enough and have the firepower as well. So Dozier hitting 29 kills on Inferno is pretty good, and I have to go to Dozier as well on Train. Like he didn't necessarily, it wasn't like lighting up the scoreboard, but it was a good average of kills across the team. But there were loads of rounds where he was on the B bomb site with a UMP, and he had some good timely aggression and flanking as well. So I think he had a really difficult job to do, and I think he managed it really well, because if he collapses in that position, then maybe that's enough for Fnatic to win. I mean, it was a 16-14 in the end, that one, but even though it's not really like the highlight, it's not the spectacular frags, it's the dirty work, if you will. But I think he held down the bomb site well when he needed to, and the aggression was very surprising to me and unexpected. Like pushing B on your end of a UMP is not something you see every day, but he picked the right times to do it. So I think he was important. Obviously, Mo had probably the tournament of his life, but sometimes I like to focus on the small things, and I think Dozier's defense towards B and his teamwork there as well was definitely important for the win on Train. And he had a great performance on Inferno, and that's going to go a long way. You need everybody to turn up, especially a team like Gambit to beat a team like Fnatic who can turn it on and crush their opponents. So that was a standout for me in that particular match, and just in general, like he did the dirty work well in a lot of the matches in this major, I feel like.
Duncan, in the past when Gambit raised the trophy, I believe it was DreamHack last time, you were saying that Doja had a above average tournament for him. Were you impressed with his play in this matchup? Who was kind of the star for Gambit in your eyes? In
the Fnatic game?
Yeah.
Actually, this is the one where I remember Adren actually wasn't that sick overall in this one. I think Hobbit and Dozier were pretty good. They were both up there, certainly. The thing is, Dozier didn't have like a standout tournament. He just had like 2 maps. Like I think there was one in the final and there was one in this matchup here where he was very good in those one-off maps. When they won DreamHack Austin, though, he'd had the entire tournament was like, the overall stats were very high. So I agree with James, especially that's the reason why I think it's unreasonable that anyone would have picked them to win this tournament, is because they had like the cliche where almost every player had at least a map where they were like the best player in the server. And you can't use the logic that like an idiot would use and say, well, to win, all your players have to be playing at peak level. No, that's objectively not the case. And most teams have, this player's the star player, this guy we don't expect as much from. And usually it's actually the other way around. It's more like if your average is pretty good, you have a good chance to win the tournament. So I feel like it was like a miracle tournament for Gambit. Everything came together. And then they had the established pieces, which you do expect to be there.
We'll get into the semifinals and the grand finals, which Gambit, of course, took a little bit later. But let's take it to the biggest matchup in the playoff bracket. We expected it potentially in a grand final. It happens in the quarters. SK versus Astralis. This is two of the top 3 teams in the world, Duncan. And I saw you on Twitter. You were pissed it was happening this early. But tell me about the match in particular. What did you see going on between SK and Astralis?
Yeah, the problem is, like, I do think this could have been one of the best matches of the tournament, because when they played at ECS, that was a fantastic game and it was really back and forth. And interestingly enough, in that series, Astralis was the team who could have won all 3 of the maps, obviously ended up losing 1-2. Meanwhile, the way SK won that match and obviously won the tournament was they were incredibly clutch when it were really under pressure and it was late in the game. So coming into this match here, the questions really seem to be around Astralis. Like, has Astralis got something different for them? Are they going to play as well at the major? Because SK, you figured they were the ones who had kind of the consistent level where it's like they're going to be very, very hard to put away. But actually, the reason why I think this matchup, no one really could have expected it to be 2-0 is because, first and foremost, SK actually went with a pick of Cash, where you would think they would do like they did at ECS and pick Mirage, but they didn't. So that in theory, that should have actually been the clear win for SK. Just like Astralis always is a favorite on Overpass, Astralis isn't a very good team on Cash. So you would expect, right, SK is at least going to get a map. They don't get a map at all. And then secondly, the way SK played, they actually really were blown out of the server by Device and Astralis.
What shocked you most in this series, seeing it go 2-0, James?
I think losing 16-6 on Overpass, that's quite a dominating scoreline. And, Device, it's been known for a number of months that when he's decided to take up this sniper role, he's essentially absorbed, like I said in one of the matches, he's like the Shang Tsung of Counter-Strike, because he's kind of like just absorbing the souls of all the other snipers and taking the best of them and trying to make himself like an amalgamation of them. I mean, I've always enjoyed, I've learned a lot watching SK on Overpass on their CT side, like how to have a sniper, like when you're playing the upper area on Overpass and you're a sniper player, for the most part, you'll have a rifler for support. Like if you're over towards long, you might be the bait as a sniper. If you're over towards the toilets, there's like 3 or 4 different common positions you can play in. I learned a lot of those watching SK, but so is Device, and he's known what to expect from the players, and he far out frags everybody on the server in that game by a long way. But I expected it to be more competitive. I know SK, I think they've been frank and said they feel like they would have done better at the tournament if they didn't have distractions outside of the tournament, which is maybe partners coming along and things like that. But I mean, well, they've got some work to do. They may have to change up their game a bit, or I don't know. But I mean, the surprise for me was losing by such a large margin on Overpass. Yeah. I would expect more from them than that.
Duncan,
I think they're one of the better teams who know how to adjust to what someone's doing, but it seemed that they really struggled to do that in that match.
Duncan, coming into this tournament, you said this may be the next run for SK, that they did it previously. This is SK version 2.0. After this loss to Astralis, do they drop it all in your world rankings? Do you look at this team differently now and don't see them any longer as that juggernaut squad?
No, they won 5 out of their last 7 tournaments. So unsurprisingly, there's no tournaments there for anyone else to have won to be above them. So they definitely don't drop in the world rankings, especially because the winner of the tournament was not FaZe or Astralis. So no one else really comes close at the moment. And then personally, this is an example of a tournament where if I'm them, I would just write this one off immediately. Like, there's still a team that's so good normally. I think this was actually quite uncharacteristic play, just stylistically. Like, there's a couple of details people might not have picked up on, which is I went back and watched all the other series that they'd played against Astralis, and I actually noticed that, surprisingly, coldzera nearly always underwhelms when he plays against Astralis. Like, he has just, what for him are bad games, but are just kind of average games for everyone else. And it's the same thing happened again here. So I feel like that's just a stylistic matchup element. But it's the fact that they didn't play like they had in the past tournaments that's the problem for me. It's not losing that's the issue. I think they could have lost to FaZe in the final of ECS. It's the fact that they lost in a fashion where they didn't play their own game at all. It's bad enough that they lost on Overpass. They should have at least been competitive, but the fact that they lost Cash especially shows me they were really off, because they've been amazing on Cash. And Astralis, actually, I don't think they'd even played Cash for 3 months or something like that. So there was no real excuse to lose in the fashion that they did. So I feel like this just shows like what the worst possible day for SK is like. I still think they're a very good team, though. They're still the number one team, in my opinion.
You said that coldzera has a bad matchup against Astralis, which is a bit shocking. Is there an individual that normally gets the best of him, or is it just the way that Astralis plays as a team?
No, I think the problem is, if you think about the strength of coldzera, he's probably the best player in the world at mid-round, making a read on what to do in whatever situation he's in. If they have a numbers advantage, then he plays very safe. If he's down a couple of teammates, then he knows when to create a 1v1 to get into a winning position. The problem is, if you play against Astralis, that is exactly what you will never get against them. Because on the T side, they play that slow punish style where two people are always covering each other's backs. On CT side, they are famously very passive and play defensively in the sites. So I feel like it's more like the reason why coldzera is so successful against most teams is most teams play a bit more of a loose individual style. And so when a player pushes up or takes a duel, he can then just win that fight. Playing against Astralis, they're not really going to give up kind of easy mistakes like that. So there's not really any kind of simple decisions he can take that he's going to win out on. So I just feel like there's a logical reason as to why you look historically when they play the series, why he just doesn't match up stylistically as well.
Astralis, they get through. It doesn't go to a game 3. They get it done in 2. And that sets up Gambit, Astralis, and the semifinals. What were the odds coming into this one? First off, James, before we get to the odds, actually, what is the feeling in the venue? Do you have more fans cheering for Gambit at this point in the tournament, or are they cheering on Astralis here?
Well, again, this is between two Virtus.Pro matches, so they're barely cheering for the most part.
They're saving their energy.
Yep. There's like 10% people cheering in during this match, which is interesting. But I think it grows, and I feel like I still have some nightmares of when some of these players were on Hellraisers, and they're always, they have the potential to like make the killing blow and win a match, but then time after time it just doesn't happen and they lose the match. So always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I'm just waiting for something to go wrong. So as it gets closer and closer, you're like, they could. You don't believe until the very end, and you're like, holy crap, they could actually do this. They're actually going to do it. And I feel like the crowd towards the end, once the upset is really possible, a real possibility, then they start to get more invested. So by the end of it, they're way more into it than at the beginning, where they're just waiting for Virtus.Pro to come back out again. But the support for Gambit grew exponentially through the tournament, especially after Virtus.Pro went out. The Gambit was essentially adopted as the home team after that point. But for this match, they warmed up over time, and by the end of it, they were really enjoying it. I mean, everybody likes an upset.
Duncan, talk me through this series, because I know you had to be tuning in, expecting Astralis to take this 2-0. They just 2-0'd SK. Now you're playing Gambit, who's kind of a tier below you. How did this play out? What were the more surprising moments throughout this series?
Yeah, so what was bizarre about the matchup is that, okay, so for Gambit, you're loving all these maps right now. Like, Overpass classically was one of your best maps. It used to be Cobble and Overpass were the two maps they won all their games on, basically. And then more recently, coming into the major, their best maps were Inferno and Train. So if you look at it from Gambit's point of view, great, we should be able to play all three maps here. But you look from the Astralis side of things, Astralis should have been a pretty clear favorite on Overpass. They're just so phenomenally good on it. So few times. I think they've only lost something like 2, maybe 3 times in all of 2017 on that map. Then you look Inferno, that should at least be one where they're competing, have a good chance to win. And then if it gets to train, they're still considered a very good train team. A lot of teams ban it against them second rotation. And so you'd consider they should actually be a small favorite on every map. So for me, the real killer was, I think they could have afforded to lose Inferno, but it's losing Overpass was the one that was the killer, because they didn't even lose it with like terrible play on their part. Mo literally had the game of his entire life. Like, he's never had anything vaguely approaching this in his entire career, and hasn't really, in the rest of the tournament, he only had like one map against Immortals that was comparable. So I feel like that was what really tilted the series to Gambit's favor. Yes, then they needed like some hero plays on train, but if they lose that Overpass game, I'm pretty confident they do just get 2-0'd actually. So I think that's just an example of where it's like the scene in the movie where the player that you normally doesn't come through has his one day where it all goes amazing, you know.
James,
I think also,
go ahead.
I think also in the last game on train, the fact that Zeus, like on Overpass, Mo had 33 kills, and like he had multiple 3Ks, 4Ks in the first half as well, and really put them ahead. But the fact that Zeus top fragged in the last game, especially after when he used that round as a timeout, essentially, and was talking to his team and stuff, like it was really poetic, like a kind of lead by example kind of thing. I thought that was quite beautiful for him to win in that fashion, where he is top fragging to take them into the finals. I thought that was awesome.
What did you think about the in-game leader battle, James, between Zeus from Gambit and Glaive from Astralis?
I think there was more than one battle for Zeus, because he has Hobbit sitting next to him, right? And it's really amazing that PGL had those replays with the player reactions, because you could see how much it meant to Hobbit, but you could also see that he was, if something went wrong, sometimes he was almost traumatized, but Zeus would he would keep his focus in the right place. So I think the main battle really for Zeus was to keep his team on the same page, make sure they weren't hung up on the loss from the previous round, and they would focus on the round to come, you know, okay, and keep them emotionally in the right place. And you could really see that that Hobbit was really feeling the emotions there. So I think the most important thing for Zeus was to just be a leader and a captain for his team, and kind of just keep instilling them in confidence to play at the level they're capable of, rather than just kind of capitulate and fall to pieces.
Duncan, did Gambit impress you more in the semifinals or the grand finals of this tournament?
I think it's probably got to be the semifinals overall, in as much as like the Astralis is a much better team than Immortals, and really, as much as you can definitely make like kind of asterisks on other elements of the tournament, you know, you didn't have to play SK, the bottom half of the bracket was kind of whack. There's no getting around the fact that if you beat Astralis in a full-on best-of-3, that's going to take a very, very good performance. You know, the only teams to have done that, like the only underdog team to have done it was Optic, and even then, the whole point is they had like one of the best performances of their entire careers. So yeah. I think that shows a very high level. I will say the Inferno game was absolutely terrible by Gambit. They looked really poor on that one. But like I said, the Overpass one, Mo really won it for them, and Train, that was the one where as a team they outplayed Astralis. So I think that was the key for me. That's kind of the one where to me they earned the major when they won that one.
And what was the big problem on Inferno for Gambit? What was the number one issue for you?
I mean, that's like a perfect example of where you feel like Astralis really didn't look that great on Overpass, because they came into Inferno and they looked like they hadn't lost a map. It was very easy for them. They just absolutely ran all over Gambit. I don't think Gambit is actually that great on the CT side of that map. I think they have a few problems. Meanwhile, you look at the Astralis guys, they were always in control of the game the entire way through. They won all their engages at that point in time. I think that was the map where no one really played that well from Gambit as well. So I think that was just like, bear in mind it was a miracle tournament. They have to have some missteps at some point in time. They're not going to win every game.
If I remember correctly, on that Inferno, it seems at some points the communication was just a complete mess for Gambit. I remember there was one round where they were making a play towards B with whatever was remaining of the team, except for Dozier, who was standing in apartments. And I could see, like the observer was over towards B, but I could see on the radar that the CT dots were moving fast enough on A that if you're in apartments, you're going to hear them running. But Dozier just stood there in apartments and just didn't do anything, and his whole team died, and he was still standing in apartments. And it was just such a bizarre scene to me. I just couldn't understand for the life of me why that just wasn't like, I thought his computer was broken or something. So And Mo had 7 kills. I thought it would be more difficult for him to be effective on a map such as Inferno because it's not what it used to be. But it seemed they said in practice that they were a complete disaster and nothing went well for them, and that match seemed to be one of those practice games to me.
We'll get more on Inferno here in a little bit as we talk about the grand finals, but let's take it from the top half of the bracket down to the bottom half. Well, actually, first off, I missed the very end, the game 3 between Gambit and Astralis. What was the reaction from Astralis after they lost? Were they just completely shocked and shattered?
I mean, the problem is they were losing for a lot of the game. Like, they were getting back into it at the end, so you get a little bit of like pep at that point in time. But the big problem is they did a couple of misplays themselves, 2 of them coming from Glaive, which when you're already losing the game and you're already getting beaten by an underdog, when you make like critical misplays, these are the type that Astralis would never make. One was where Glaive literally killed his own teammate in a 1v2 and they lost the round off it. And then the second one was where dupreeh was going to initially try and knife a player that he was behind, and then Glaive just ran near him, and so the guy looked around to look at Glaive and saw the dupreeh, I think it was, and killed him. So when you're doing that on top of it, I think in their heart of hearts in that game, they already kind of had that sinking feeling like we're fucking up everything at this point in time and we're going to lose. So I think by the end of the game, they knew it was inevitable they were going to lose. But I think overall, it was a shocking series, certainly, because as soon as you beat SK and you see that bracket, if anything, you think you've won the major at that point in time.
And John the Robot in the chat says not to mention the 2v4 versus Astralis on Overpass. Doja saves on B while Hobbit gets a 1v4 hero. Anyway, go ahead, James.
I was just going to add that, I was surprised over the tournament that Device did as well as he did in any of the matches because, he had 2 close people to him pass away. And I could see after the games, he was just like, definitely wasn't his normal self. So I think it was in the back of his mind, if not something else. So he wasn't the happiest chappy, but he was keeping it together pretty well. But I don't know if he necessarily wanted to be there all the time. But I mean, again, I think maybe he exceeded expectation given the circumstances. But any team the level of Astralis is going to be frustrated and feel crap after a loss, right? It's just the nature of the beast.
Let's take it down to the other semifinals where we have a very surprising matchup. Immortals and Virtus.Pro here. Duncan, this is a bit of a shocker coming in, but did you think at this point in the tournament, home crowd VP has the edge, or was this clear in Immortals match?
Well, the big problem is you can only have this is one of the aspects of the home crowd that people don't seem to appreciate, is that you only have a home crowd if you're winning the game. Right. If you're losing the game and you absolutely suck and the other team's wrecking you, that will be a silent crowd. That will be a crowd that doesn't exist. I mean, this famously happened one time when the old, what's now envious, but was LDLC played against Fnatic at ESWC, so it was in France. But because they were just getting wrecked the whole time, the crowd had no impact on the game whatsoever. So it's more to me that VP couldn't make it competitive. And if it had been a really close game, then I think then VP would have had edges with experience and all the rest of it. But because they let the Immortals guys front run and they are a hot team, I think they just got way out of control way too early in both maps.
James, why did the wheels fall off the bus for VP here against Immortals after they just 2-0'd North?
I don't know. They got absolutely smashed in that game. But I have to add, because I was in the booth at one point, like it's really quiet in the booth. So it does. I mean, that glass is pretty solid stuff. So it does drown out a lot of the noise. Although I wasn't in there during a VP match, so you would have heard stuff. But the thing is, it was funny with all there was some like emo people on Reddit saying, "Oh, Immortals are too rude of the way they just go nuts at the end of each round and say all kinds of stuff." But I got linked to like KNG playing at some old lands and stuff, and it is insane how much shouting and stuff there is going on. So I don't feel like they'd be FaZe. If anything, I feel like it would egg them on even more to want to beat their opponent. The fact that they have the home crowd advantage, I think they love that stuff because they have so much fire. It's really great to watch. Just how ready they are for that kind of thing. But definitely in that crowd, you only sing when you're winning for the most part. It's not like a Man U game where they'll try and get behind them to egg them on. It was fairly quiet in comparison when things weren't going their way. But I mean, credit to the booths. Most of it you wouldn't be able to hear. They were pretty good.
Overall, we get the finals that we didn't expect to see, Duncan, but we still saw decent viewership. What were your thoughts on the major as a whole, knowing that the grand finals is coming down to Gambit versus Immortals?
That sucks. I mean, that was the final of DreamHack Austin, and then it was the final of the major. So, unfortunately, I just feel like you can't blame PGL for that at all. And even the format itself, that's one of the most unlikely outcomes. Because let's say, for example, it had been Gambit Virtus.Pro. Even if Gambit wins the match, then okay, it's history. You're playing a team that's been in major finals, has been very good. I feel like even if the bracket had just shaken out differently, and let's say, for example, that you played Astralis, but you played them in the final, it was the same result. Again, you're playing a team that's the reigning major champions. There's all the history, the prestige. The problem is, you look at this playoff bracket, and Immortals versus Gambit wasn't even vaguely the best game in the playoff bracket, and neither team really has Gambit has some history with some of their players, but the entire team doesn't have, and Immortals especially, they've never even been in a major. So it was kind of like for me, once that final was set, a lot of the energy kind of dissipated away,
It was kind of crazy to see that just today, KNG is officially made a member of Immortals. He was a stand-in for this entire tournament, and he was kind of a rock star, at least with all the highlight clips I saw on my feed. Throughout this series, though, in the grand final, James, who was your favorite player to watch, or who impressed you most out of all 10 that were on the main stage?
That's a hard one to answer because I've seen a bunch of KNG and I know what to expect from him, but it's another thing to perform on the big stage, right? It's hard not to have bias because I'm an Adren fanboy, but I think it depends on your perspective. Like I think Hobbit, seeing how he was feeling the pressure and was almost ejected when something went wrong, he still performed at a very good level despite that. So that's one way to look at it. I mean, another way is Zeus holding his team together and top fragging to put them into the match in the first place, but that's going to the prior match. Steel had some really good performances, especially on train. He was an absolute monster on that map in general during the tournament. I don't know if I could pick one particular player, but to your question to Duncan previously, I was interested in the final, but for me, Gambit had to win the final. I think Immortals had gone further than they could have expected, and I really wanted to see the likes of Zeus and Adren win a major. So that moment for me was amazing. When the first map happened, I was like, holy crap, it's going to be a terrible final. So I'm glad it wasn't
16-4 on Cobblestone. Why the blowout to kick things off? Let's dive right into game number one. What was going wrong for Gambit? You just beat Astralis. It's a fresh day, and now Cobblestone not going your way.
Are you talking to me?
Sorry, I'll take it to James on this. James, okay. What did you see on Cobblestone when they first got blown out?
I didn't see anything on Cobblestone. If they won 4 rounds, so there wasn't much that we did see. But that I don't even know what happened in that match, in that map. Sorry, but I was just like, please don't let this be like a 2-0, just a fisting. I have no idea what happened in that.
Duncan, did you see anything from the Brazilians that was catching Gambit off guard, or was it just looking like Gambit was off in that first game?
It was both at the same time. Like, Immortals is a team, like, they're literally not a squad where you can say how they play on any one map because they're so hot and cold. Okay. So this has always been their best map. And Henny traditionally is the most streaky of all the players on their team. And this was the one map where he went absolutely crazy. So I think you give a team like that a chance to front run as they did against Virtus.Pro. And yeah, they can beat a bunch of teams. The problem is they're not going to get that roll up against most people. Then on the Gambit side of things, the best player and the most stable player on Gambit is Adren. And he had the worst game of the tournament. I think that alone, that's most of the equation that comes out with the result 16-4 by Immortals.
Yeah, not a whole lot to talk about there. Pretty short game. Train, though, at least we got to double digits for both squads, and it's Gambit who now ties this up 1-1. Did you think Gambit was going to go out at this point, or did you know we were going into a game 3 when you saw Train locked in, Duncan?
I thought Gambit was going to win the whole way. Like, I think they could have, on paper, they could have won Cobblestone as well. I thought it was a great veto for them again. They end up with maps that they really like. I think for me, the only maps I thought that Immortals actually could win on is I certainly knew they had a chance on Cobblestone. And then Inferno has been the map where since they've got KNG and they've had this explosive double op setup, that's been a map that's been there for them. So for me, they had to win the first and the third maps. So I thought we were going to 3.
And you said that Henny's always been hot or cold with his op. James, I want to hit you with this question, though. Who is the more impressive opper for Immortals throughout the tournament? Was it KNG, or do you still say Henny for this tournament?
Well, Henny's the primary opper for the team, but I think KNG is a more consistent opper. And there was a match, I guess it was the final, maybe, where Henry was calling out Immortals for not throwing the AWP to KNG instead of Henny when Henny was having a terrible game. Yeah, but I think KNG is a considerably stronger rifler as well, so that has more implications. But I mean they're both explosive, that's for sure. I think KNG is more consistent, and sometimes Henny can be missing from the server. And I was actually afraid that might be a 2-0 on Train because Immortals can have strong games on Train with the double ops, obviously more on the CT side, obviously, but they're not scared to do it on the T side, which I don't think is amazing idea personally. But still has had really good performances on Train as well. So I was really worried that we would just see a 2-0 blowout, because if the frame of mind is not there for Gambit, then you could have another 16-4. So, especially going by how the first map went, I was concerned at that point. But back to the AWPers, I think KNG is more consistent, but they're pretty much as explosive as each other. They're capable of great things.
Duncan, on Train specifically, did you see anything from Zeus that got his team back in it? Was there a player making big plays early on that got Gambit back into this best of 3?
The thing is, the way that Gambit played Train in this series is like a classic example of where you can see the kind of DNA of an in-game leader, even with a totally different team. Because when he was in Na'Vi and he was the in-game leader, they were one of the first on this rework of Train that we play now to become one of the absolute best. And they always did it from the T side. Like, even though they used to have this crazy lineup of mad players like Flamey and Guardian, some of the best players in the world, they still were never that sick on CT side, and they always won off their T side. And at this tournament, it was T side play on Train that basically won them the tournament. You go back and look at the Fnatic series, the Astralis series, the Immortals series, all of these maps, it's winning on the T side. Whereas actually a lot of teams who have good records on Train, it's because they have a really solid CT side and they can get those 9 or 10 rounds and make it easier for themselves. So for me, that first half really was like, it almost secured the game for Gambit, because the problem with Immortals is they aren't in the same kind of leadership situation. Like, as far as I know, I think they've switched in-game leader to Bolts now, which is one of the reasons I think Steel got freed up a bit to do better this tournament. And so Immortals, I don't think of them as kind of a cerebral team, really. I never thought they shared as much with SK in that sense. And I think they are more who play off like fast-paced, play off skill, play off individual peaks. And so it's real tough to get 9 or 10 rounds on T-side Train if you're a team that doesn't have a really good foundation, I think.
To add to that, during our last season of ECS, we had an interview with Steel when they played some LAN matches at Esports Arena, and he said that they don't really have like a captain figure in the team. Like, Zeus is clearly, I mean, he's the in-game leader, but he's also a captain. He's the natural leader of the team. He's the guy who gets everyone together, and you have Fallen for SK, but Immortals don't have that figure in the team. And I think like going back again to some rounds on maps which are not amenable to double up on the T side, where they would look to do that and then just not get anywhere. I feel like a captain figure is like, no, we need to do this, keep people focused on the right thing. Whereas I don't know if there is a figure like that in the team at the moment, which can be a problem at big events like a major.
Do you think that had an impact as Immortals loses game 2 and now you're loading up game 3 Inferno?
I think it may have caused them problems. I can only guess, but like times where, again, I keep going back to double ups, but I think that's something that they would learn from. I think they'll make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes and hopefully not make them again. So in the vacuum of this match, It depends on what the what the psyche is. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen the camera footage from after the final where KNG just smashed his equipment to pieces. He just completely destroyed his stuff. So, like, if you have a captain figure, maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe he needs to do that. As long as it's after the match, right? If you want to smash your stuff, then go for it. But it doesn't. Maybe it's a good expression for him. I don't know. We can only judge from a distance, right? So it's difficult to say if within one match the captain figure makes a difference. We only see those kind of scenes after the match. They seem to be in good spirits and have the fire in their belly. When they win rounds and they're like shouting at their opponents and so on. And I think that's good. I think it's good to be doing that. So I think we can only guess, really.
Duncan, who is the fan favorite coming into this one? Clearly in the venue it was Gambit, but across the CSGO scene, Game 3's loading up, Major's on the line. Everyone's already a little disappointed. It's not SK, it's not Astralis in the grand final. Who do you think the fans were behind, though, as we loaded up Inferno?
I think massively Gambit, especially because one of the things people won't necessarily appreciate about Gambit is players like Zeus, Adren would already be popular, and obviously there was already like memes around Dossier, etc. But part of that was generated by Gambit, the organization, because what happened was Gambit was more famous for their League of Legends squad that they had a few years back that was the best in League of Legends. And they had similar figures in those teams there. So, for example, they had a guy a bit like Dossier, who was called Genja, and he was a guy who, again, never spoke English. No one really knew his personality. He was a very quiet person. And so they did the same thing with him. They played up all these stupid memes that, he, as a result, he's some really weird guy and has some unusual life, which is what they've done with Dossier. So basically, the marketing squad for Gambit has always been very good. They've been very good with social media. If there's a joke that the community has, they pick it up and they play with it constantly. So as a result, I think they already had kind of a cult following beyond not necessarily being like the best team in the world. Then you've got to add into the equation that they were the ones that beat Astralis. They've just beaten Fnatic, obviously some fan favorites there. Whereas the Immortals team, they've never been in a major. Everyone from Brazil, if they're just honest, actually supports SK and just magically became an Immortals fan when they made it to the final. And also, the fact that Immortals doesn't have like the big names in the same way. So, for example, even though Henny's had standout tournaments, he doesn't have anywhere close to the name value of like Zeus, even Dossier, etc. at the moment.
Not yet. Gambit still has the fan edge. Let's talk about the in-game edge because it's Inferno. We see Gambit beat Fnatic, but then they get beaten here 16-8 by Astralis. So you're coming off a loss on Inferno in the semifinals. Now it's the grand final, and we're going the distance. This one decides it all. Who do you think had the edge statistically as the map starts?
Me?
Yeah, use.
I mean, the thing is, when they played against Astralis, they were terrible, but Astralis is also good on that map. So that's not that worrying because coming into the tournament, Inferno was one of the absolute best maps for Gambit. It was good for Immortals as well, certainly. That's the one where I really start to notice they picked up some steam at DreamHack Summer. So for me, this was, on paper, it was a 50-50 map. But when you look at the styles of the two teams, so Immortals do play this very streaky style. Henny's known to be a player that's not very consistent, and he's your primary AWPer. Gambit's a team that has good T sides. They run off a proper system. I'll always go at it with that as the pick as to what's going to win. That's why people might be surprised so often why sometimes I pick, for example, Astralis to beat SK or something like that. It's because I'll go with the consistency and the elements I feel like you can reproduce over like one-off big performances.
James, what were the biggest moments in the game? Clearly, Reddit loved the X-God's grenade.
Yeah, that was. I mean, that's not something we've seen before. Mainly with Molotovs off the balcony. Get Right did it in an online game. I mean, it wasn't a major, right? So it was quite spectacular. But it was a long time ago, and it's a very rare thing, especially on New Inferno, where you see a lot of bomb plants towards the other side of the site as well. So that was pretty cool. But I think, I mean, Hobbit had some insane rounds. I mean, he had the one over towards B where he had like a 2-3 man. I think it was a 3K with a 2-man spray down towards the end was just bonkers. And really, going into Inferno, I thought it was a coin flip who would win at that point. But he had some massive clutches. Well, that one in particular was absolutely humongous, and what a boost for your team as well. So pull off something like that. It was insane that he managed to do that. And I feel like that run would have a lot to do with KNG smashing all his equipment, because how do you, from their perspective, how on earth do you lose that situation? It's mad.
You got a keyboard to lend KNG? Something you want to send his way?
Hell no. Do you know how much he's cost me to build? There's no chance.
I have no idea. How much does a keyboard cost you to build, James? For those out there who don't know, James, of course, not only is a commentator, a scuba diver, he is also a keyboard connoisseur.
The one I built for Days cost about $340. As an example, like you can buy them. You can buy one out from like Amazon for like $150, $200, but like almost everything's customized in the ones I make, so it's a bit pricier.
Sounds like it. It's like a custom car. You're putting all the sweet stuff on it. Duncan, back to the game. Same question for you.
Luckily, though, it's not as bad if someone just steals your really expensive keyboard, though. Shout out to Sadicist.
Heyo.
It's all right. It's back now. We're allowed to make jokes about it now. Yeah, it's fine.
Thank God for the Nova Scotia Police Department.
Exactly.
All right, Duncan.
I did think of a Mario Kart joke, but I didn't want to get stabbed in the chest, so I thought I'd leave it alone.
Okay.
I don't know the whole context there. Duncan, break down final game for us. How did we close out the major on Inferno?
What do you mean, how do we close it? Oh, the last half of the game or something?
Yeah.
I mean, this was a perfect example of what I meant about why you go with Gambit, because after Gambit manages to win the CT half heavily, the whole tournament, they've been a T-side team. They've been either winning the T-sides, or they don't even have to play a whole T-side because they win enough rounds to just win the game outright. So for me, this is like the history of Zeus led up to this moment, because one of the things he was very famous for was before they had players like Flamey in Na'Vi, they used to have a team that actually didn't have that much skill. They were mainly carried by Guardian, and at the time the second best player was actually Edward in CSGO. So they had a much more of a supportive core. He's obviously one of the support players now. They had like Starix was still playing, Zeus was still playing, and they very much were working with a lot less talent in the team. And so one of the things they were famous for was being able to grind out rounds. And what we mean by that, for people who don't understand the terminology, is when you grind out rounds, it's not like you just win like 4 in a row and like you grind it out that way. It's more like if you know you have to win 4 rounds, but you have 10, then you do strategies, which like, yeah, they're not going to work every time, but you know the odds are I'll get enough out of it. That's like the logic that you're trying to use. And so that's one of the things that they were very, very famous for. And so they would hit the same execute 3 or 4 times in a row at similar timings and know that if we just get it all right, the timing, we will win one of these rounds and get what we need. So coming in, knowing you only need 5 T rounds on new Inferno, I feel like this was perfectly set up just for Zeus to do what he always does, that he was able to do in this situation. And yeah, this is just a classic example of what you expect from those grind out T sides.
Is this the first major championship for Zeus?
Yeah.
And I assume everyone else
for any
on this Gambit squad.
No CIS player has ever won a major in CSGO.
How big is that for the CIS region?
Well, it's especially big in as much as 3 Kazakhstani players won. And obviously, in theory, they were always on the bottom of the pecking order in CIS because they are in the worst situation resource-wise, because their country didn't have the same amount of like sponsorship and opportunity to travel places. They also have pretty bad ping in general. Like you'll notice a lot of the Russian players who have okay ping live at the very, very west of Russia. They don't live like right at the east, you know. So people don't realize what a different world it is to be from Kazakhstan in that sense. So the fact that a CIS team won and the majority of them was from Kazakhstan, to me, is almost inexplicable. You know, you would never expect that to happen. You would think it would be like a Ukraine and Russia mix would win, like Na'Vi.
And James, what was the feeling like in the venue once it was all said and done, that final round 16 gets locked in for Gambit?
It was amazing. The crowd were really behind them. I was feeling it as well. I was a fanboy when that happened. It was just totally awesome. You know, it's because the thing is, it had so much storyline behind it for Zeus, as Duncan mentioned earlier, for Adren, for Dozier, the storied people, you know, partly because of what Gambit did, but partly just the history in the game. And obviously Zeus being the in-game leader in exile from Na'Vi as they watch on the sidelines is pretty bonkers. And you go to the rest of the team like Mo and Hobbit, the other Kazakhstanis, like, if I'm not mistaken, Adren had to go to an internet cafe. I mean, he used to play in European leagues at probably 4 a.m. local time with 100 ping and body people online. So it's just insane the the road to this point for all these players for different reasons. So it was just such a great story. And then he gets on the mic and shouts, "I love you, Olafmeister," which is just it's just ridiculous.
And it's like life-changing money as well. I'm sure. You know, we had kind of talked about Virtus.Pro and how their paychecks now are such a difference maker where they live. I'm sure the same can be said for everyone on this Gambit squad. They've won big tournaments before, but never a $1 million prize pool tournament. So big congrats to everyone on Gambit. Immortals, though, let's talk about the next steps. Duncan, you said this is a cold team. How low do they drop? How high do they jump up in the next 3 months? Where are they at currently as well, as we provide some context to the global rankings for these two teams?
I don't have Immortals as a top 10 ranked team. Like, I didn't think that they were... Like, I think they were, like, borderline, like, earlier in the year when they had their nice run at Katowice, and then they managed to... I think that was about it. Oh, they had the final, obviously, of Austin where they lost to Gambit. Okay, at that point in time, they were a top 10 team, but even then, they were very much a bottom half. You know, they were like a 7th, 8th team, and that's just by virtue of the placings. So they already were a team that were going in and out of the top 10 rankings. Even with this win here, because of the fact that they basically didn't beat anyone who's a strong team, I think it's hard to kind of say, even from this run, that you have to put them very high in any rankings. Like, it's not like automatically you can do that, because they had easily, for me, the weakest run that we've ever seen of a team who made the final. They were just a mixture of the Swiss system and then surprising opponents and the bracket draw. Nothing they can do about it, but they just didn't really beat any top teams. So I personally don't think they're a very good team, even despite this finish.
Do you think locking in KNG officially will help them improve in the global rankings as it goes on, or are you not expecting much from the current 5-man roster?
I think they're an all right team. I just think if you look at it, like, this is the worst era ever to be decent if you're Immortals, because all the best players in Brazil play in SK Gaming. Like, if they still had Phelps, maybe you could do something with that. And obviously, they don't even have the veteran aspect that FNX could have brought. I think they're just not in a great place right now. It's obviously the best period they've had as a team, but there's not really any obvious way to improve, because so many of the players in the team, and the simplest way to put it is this way: as long as you base the team around Henny, you will never be a world-class team, because as a player, he just consistently doesn't perform at the highest level when you put him against the likes of Coldzera, Nico, Device. These guys get it done every tournament, you know.
Right. Let's talk about the other side. For Gambit, James, where do you have Gambit in your global rankings, and how does this tournament now affect that standing?
When I saw the final, I did wonder if we were going to have a Leicester City situation with one of these players. If you're not familiar, they won the English Premier League and then almost got relegated the next year. They just came out of nowhere, won the entire league somehow, almost never lost a match, and then just about, I don't even know, I think they just about survived relegation and fired their manager the very next season. I don't expect that extreme, but obviously with lots of online matches, Gambit don't do very well in those, and who knows what kind of consistency they will have. But I think they've got more to lose in that respect than Immortals do. Again, I think with Immortals, they're missing that captain that they need, but with Gambit, they have their team. I don't know if they were going to be part of the CIS shakeup, which is apparently happening. Who knows? I think it's hard to do it when you win the friggin' major. But again, I don't think it. I mean, on paper, it might elevate their stock a lot, but really, I think, it's still one tournament, and yes, it's the major. They had to beat some big teams to get there, but it's about consistency, which is something that like North don't have, for example. And I think it's something that Gambit needs to prove to us. So I wouldn't like push them up the ladder too far, because it's just one tournament, and consistency is something we need to see. Like, can they consistently beat the teams who are in, let's say, the top 6? I couldn't answer that question right now. Yes, they did that this tournament, but it's just one tournament. So I think we need to look at, in fairness to them, one thing they haven't had necessarily in the last few months is invite to some of the bigger lands. I think that's partly because it's a popularity contest, which was curious going into this finals. Like the bigger brands, like your Fnatics and the ones with a bigger traditional fan base, are going to get invites before they are. So now they've won the major. Hopefully they'll get some more invites. They'll get more opportunity to prove themselves versus top flight competition. But until they do that, I wouldn't suddenly put them like in a top 5 or something.
Top 5? It's pretty high.
Well, I mean, maybe they'll get there, but I wouldn't necessarily put them in the top 5 now.
Okay,
I think yeah, if you have a point system and maybe the major puts them there, but I think for me, I would like to see consistent high performances over an extended period of time, like 4-6 weeks at least. With tournaments in them. We're going into a holiday period now, so after that, obviously.
I was going to say, let's talk about next steps here in the world of Counter-Strike, competitive Counter-Strike. What happens after this major? You already touched on the roster shuffles. Of course, rosters are locked throughout the whole major process. As soon as the major's over, that's where we start to see teams moving. Who's going to go first? Is it the CIS roster shuffle the only thing happening? What other moves are being made? We already saw North making some moves with Magis being benched.
I mean, other obvious ones are, like, people still speculate maybe Virtus.Pro, someone might retire from there, and who knows which direction they go with the player there, because that's always been a tough one. I think for the CIS region, my sources tell me that apparently it didn't even matter where Gambit placed in this tournament. They were never going to be in the shuffle anyway. So presumably that means we're talking Na'Vi and Flipside, and those are really the teams potentially, who knows, maybe Angel from Hellraisers. Seems like that's an obvious one where something's got to change, because Na'Vi's had that lineup for over a year now. I think it's just over a year. And yet they really haven't gotten enough good placings out of it. They've only had, like, I think 3 top 4s or something. Not really what you'd expect, because they were thinking they could become the number 1 team with that move. So I feel like if you take the right mixture of players there, you can improve Na'Vi, certainly.
Is there any chance that we see Na'Vi go back and try and buy Zeus's love? Or is that bridge burned way too long ago?
I don't think it's a burned bridge, because I'm sure Zeus would make more money for Na'Vi, playing for Na'Vi, right? Major aside, I think, like, I can only assume he would make a lot more cash than maybe he was making before the major. Who knows? Maybe they get a raise or something now. But I think in that situation, you can never. I wouldn't be too proud to go back and get paid loads of money and demand a signing on bonus. But now you've won the major, that changes things entirely.
Right, Duncan, is that within the realm of possibility, or do you see that move never happening?
I think Na'Vi might try for it. The big issue is this. It depends how realistic a person Zeus actually is, because supposedly they did say they were losing all their practice games. I mean, online games, they're terrible. So in theory, he should have known coming into this tournament that this was like a one-off, how well it all came together, because it hadn't even done that in some of the past tournaments. So if he's a very realistic person, then I think he should think logically, right, obviously my future would be better if I was in Na'Vi. Na'Vi have got all these great pieces to work with. Why not go and rejoin that team and try and do something special there? In fact, if I was him, I'd even use the logic of, I've already won you a major in Gambit. Like, what more do you want from me here? I've done the best we could possibly do. Problem is, though, Zeus is one of those players that the West doesn't really know very much, because he doesn't speak English very much. And he's also one of those players I notice where whenever we do have interviews and they're translated, they all start mentioning stuff about like God and if it's willed and destiny and stuff. So as soon as people start talking like that, I'm out, because if you believe it, like God was directing your path, well, maybe the big man upstairs plans for you to win 3 majors in Gambit. So just stick around, mate. Like, fuck.
What move would you like to see? How do you make a super team of all the players in the CIS? Who do you want to see playing alongside each other in the future?
See, the thing is, whenever I make moves, right, you obviously can't make a ridiculous move. It's like idiots who are fans of like Manchester United, right? Well, why doesn't the best player from Chelsea and then the best player from this team? Well, why would they do that move? Is the point, right? It's got to be vaguely realistic, so it could happen. So the good thing I think about a potential CIS shuffle, if it included Gambit, is I think you could make all the teams better. So, for example, one of the moves I'd love to do tomorrow, if I could, is, to me, the players that have underperformed the most relative to their role in Na'Vi is actually Seized and Guardian. Right, take Seized and Guardian, chuck them into Gambit. So put Guardian instead of Mo, who I think is a much better AWPer, and take Seized and put him instead of Dosia. Seized was a fantastic support player before he had to be the in-game leader. That alone makes Gambit a really dangerous team who already have a structure. I think that would be a fantastic lineup. Then for Na'Vi's side of the equation, first things first, I think you've got to try and get Electronic if you can from Flipside, because he looks like a revelation at the moment. And then I have to say, if I was Na'Vi, I would just either send a blank check to Angel and say, come and join as the in-game leader, or I'd just bite the bullet and say, right, doesn't matter what like a reputation says, you've got to get Blade, because what they need in that team is you've got to have an in-game leader, because they've had all the talent in the world for a year now and they haven't gotten a whole lot out of it.
And what did you say is the reputation issue for Blade? Did he have issues with Na'Vi specifically in the past, or is he just a tough in-game leader to play under?
No, it's just that for whatever reason, like the last couple of years were marked by most top teams allowing star players to determine how the team plays and essentially just break a tactic anytime they want in the middle of the round. And Blade is an in-game leader who runs a real tactic and he prepares a tactic and you're going to do what he says in the tactic. And so it's not that he had like any attitude problems. It's just that people within the CIS scene just were like, oh, he doesn't know how to play modern Counter-Strike. He's just stuck in 2008, doing tactics and stuff. Whereas, by the way, for everyone who thought that, like, the Olaf Meisters of the world, Gambit just won the major with like barely any top players, mate. So tactics are pretty good. I think they have their own place in the scene. So for me, if I'm Na'Vi, I would hope you're kind of humbled by the fact you had all these great players but didn't do much, and now you realize it's got to be Zeus or Angel or Blade. It's got to be a real in-game leader who comes in and turns the ship around.
Awesome. There we have Duncan's suggestions on what he'd like to see. James, is there any CIS super team you'd like to see?
No, I like Gambit. I would like to see Blades, get more for the work he puts in. But I wonder about fragging power if he went to Na'Vi, because I don't recall which match it was, but I felt like there was one team who was just literally targeting his position like as if it was a free kill every round. But I mean, who knows? Maybe it's less stressful with better players and he frags better. Who knows? But I've been a fan of what he did since he was on that team, which it was when he was first on my radar playing in the leagues that we commentate and so on. So I'd like to see him have more success than he does have at the moment, for sure.
And James, what is next for you now? We know there's going to be some roster shuffles. When's your next commentary gig?
I can't mention it now.
Okay, we got secret events coming up. Be ready for them.
Possible roster move for James. Okay.
Yeah, but for the next month or so, I have my own production company, so I'm busy doing productions, which are outside of Counter-Strike.
Very cool, my friend. Very cool stuff. Duncan, what about you? What's the next big tournament?
Well, I've got Gfinity. I've got a week of that coming up soon. I believe it's August 5th during the player break, but something.
There we go. And final question for you guys, both overall out of 10 stars, because we're now doing a 10-star scale for some reason. How many stars does the Krakow PGL major get?
Wait a minute, what's the criteria, though? Just overall as a major compared to other majors?
Yeah, compared to all of the majors so far.
Oh, you're going to like this one. So compared to all the majors, I'll give it 2 stars out of 10.
2 out of 10? What are the big knocks? How do you lose 8 stars?
The games were just complete shit. The Swiss system ruined everything. The bracket was absolute garbage. The final was lackluster. The best game of the tournament was in the quarterfinals. What else? There was a lot of tech problems on the early part of the tournament. So it had positives. The problem is, here's the thing. I guess 2 stars might be harsh in as much as some of the early majors were very low resources. They didn't have as much. So maybe I'll make it 5 stars. But the problem is, with all these resources, and if it had fantastic games and we'd had a better bracket, etc., I think it could have been the 10 out of 10. That's the big problem. Is I felt a bit underwhelmed in that sense.
Were you impressed by the spectating throughout?
What do you mean spectating?
The observing. Sorry.
The observing was fine. We had the best observers there overall, so I think they did a decent enough job. I have to say, in general, actually, considering PGL were the ones that got slammed 3 SL Colognes observing in the round of 8, they used the real observers this time. That helped. And secondly, they are actually pretty good at doing the camera shots that are third person, but then going to the first person in the game itself. So I think that was pretty good as an all.
Yeah, I saw some Reddit threads on that. James, let's go over to you. 10-star scale. How many stars does it get?
It is a tough one, especially because I'm trying not to color my opinion based on the finals, which I did enjoy after the first map, which was pretty bad, and the storylines behind it. On the spectating, observing, I do like that PGL didn't try to do too much, because in Cologne, you know, what's cool is when you have people who know what you're saying, like literally, as in understand English. If there's an opportunity, if you're talking about a player, like you see something on the radar or your own observer PC, they'll go to that player, so there's a connection with the audience. But like I might ask for something in Cologne, and it was just like there's nothing going on. It was pretty brutal. Out of 10, it's a difficult one. I would go to a 7, but I mean, this is not really scientific. I think what they did with the stage was amazing. The fact that they had glass booths all the way around really changed what they could do to the environment, having the booths face each other.
Yeah,
I thought that it might be, you know, there's always a potential issue there with like flashbangs, right? Like there was an infamous time, I don't forget what tournament it was, where there was a smoke on Cash at A main, and he was on a CT side and he threw a flashbang and saw 3 people's screens, their faces go white. So it said 3 people are in A main, right? So that was my first concern. But the lighting in the booth was good enough to minimize that. If people did that, I don't know. But I think the trade-off I think it helped with the atmosphere. Sorry, my brain is really dead right now. The atmosphere in the venue, and the fact they could put them in the middle as opposed to at the back, that really made a difference to the whole thing. So I think being there is like a 7 or 8 out of 10. But that's just like the live bit. Of course, there were loads of technical issues with the studio segment. But you know, for someone who's going to the major and just seeing those 3 days, I think it's a 7 or 8, because its highs were very, very high. And its lows were annoying, but didn't really pull down from the event overall if you're there just for those 3 days.
We'll take a 5, we'll take a 7, and our overall grade on today's show is a 7. Big shout out to everyone at PGL. Pulling off a major is not easy. I know the amount of effort that goes in across the board. Congratulations to Gambit. They go the distance, and KNG is now officially a member of Immortals, the team that finished second. If you guys missed any of it, don't worry. All the games can be found online. And of course, if you missed anything in today's episode, you can check out boomio.com/TLDW every Monday. They're going to have a new article. Big shout out to James Bardolph. James, thank you for joining the show. If you guys want to follow this scuba driver, powerboat captain, production genius, and creative director, I can't even talk anymore, make sure you follow him on Twitter at James Bardolph. You know Thorin. 3 O's. That's Thorin on Twitter. We'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for tuning in. And of course, remember, tomorrow we got a big showdown. It's going to be Shocks going up against Kenny S. 3 maps to 50 kills each. It's the Boomio pre-fire maps, and you don't want to miss it. It's going down 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, July 26th. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.